Module 1, Business Intelligence Services Overview and Installation. You can see page numbers in the lower right-hand corner. I'll be periodically calling out page numbers to you. Let's talk about the objectives first on the bottom of page 2. We're going to talk about the purpose of each of the business intelligence services. There are 3. We'll talk about the architecture of reporting services. We'll talk about the 2 different databases, Report Server and Report Server TempDB, and how they work and what they do. We'll talk about understanding the life cycle of a report, as well as the development environment we'll be using to build our reports. And we'll introduce the reporting services configuration manager utility, which is used to make configuration changes to the reporting services environment and the service. Let's move on to page 4. SQL Server Business Intelligence. Since SQL Server 2005 was released, Microsoft has bundled in the product 3 different services that collectively represent business intelligence. In addition to the most commonly used service, which is the relational database engine, which people call Microsoft SQL Server, if you purchase the product Microsoft SQL Server, you also get SQL Server Integration Services, which is a very robust import-export utility, sometimes referred to as a extraction, transformation, and load ETL utility. You also get SQL Server Analysis Services. It's an environment designed to host data models. If you've worked with Excel pivot tables, that's the type of data model that Analysis Services host. The sole purpose for Analysis Services data models is to allow the users to have a very high speed, very flexible and responsive environment for analyzing and looking at data. We can use Analysis Services as a data source for SQL Server reports. And we have SQL Server Reporting Services. It's an enterprise-level reporting utility. We can go ahead and build reports, and we can go ahead and deploy those. And those reports are hosted on a website. And they can be viewed by a user through a browser. We're going to focus modules 1 through 9 on working with reporting services. If you're going to be taking a look at the individual if you're going to be taking a look at the individual one-day presentations, you'll see a one-day presentation of integration services and a one-day presentation of analysis services. But for now, let's just focus on reporting services. The tools that we'll be using to work with this environment, the SQL Server developer tools, are based on and integrated into Visual Studio. The virtual machine that you'll be using to do your lab activities, or the training machine you'll be using to do your lab activities, has Visual Studio 2019 installed. Visual Studio can be augmented to display additional templates. SQL Server data tools are the business intelligence templates that Microsoft provides to expand what Visual Studio can do. The common mistake that is made is people launch Visual Studio, or they launch SQL Server data tools and Visual Studio launches, and they think they've made a mistake. Before SQL Server 2019, there used to be a separate utility, a separate icon called SQL Server Data Tools. And you would launch it, and you would see Visual Studio launching. Now we simply launch Visual Studio 2019. So a little bit later when I start doing demos, you're just going to see me launch Visual Studio 2019. And then I'll go ahead and choose the template for creating reporting services projects. If you're going to be looking at integration services and analysis services with me, you'll also see me open Visual Studio and then choose the template for integration services or analysis services. We no longer have a separate utility called SQL Server Data Tools when you're working with reporting services, integration services, or analysis services. That was true in previous versions of SQL. But now with SQL Server 2019, we simply have Visual Studio 2019, and the templates are integrated into it. If you've worked with Visual Studio before, you've used it to create a variety of different type of projects, from projects based on C# or Visual Basic .NET, or any other .NET programming languages. You can also create ActiveServerPage.NET websites. Visual Studio 2019 needs to be downloaded and installed separately. In the introduction, I showed you where you could go ahead and download and install Visual Studio. A little bit later, if the opportunity presents itself, if needed, I'll show you how you can go ahead and get the templates for integration services, reporting services, and analysis services. Let's continue with the information that we see on page 6. What exactly is SQL Server Integration Services? Well, it's a ETL tool, extract, transform, and load. It's designed for organizations to connect to data sources and move the data that's hosted on that data source into a different environment. The larger the organization, the more likely the company is working with disparate and different data environments. You might need to grab data from an Excel workbook or an ASCII CSV file and import it into a Microsoft SQL Server relational database. Your company might be using Oracle. You might want to move data off Oracle. Or your company might be using Microsoft Access and you want to move data out of Microsoft Access into Microsoft SQL Server. The source can be pretty much anything that's available to you, and the destination can be pretty much anything that's available to you. The source does not have to be Microsoft SQL Server, and the destination does not have to be Microsoft SQL Server. We can use SQL Server integration services to connect to pretty much any data source and move that data to pretty much any destination. Built into SQL Server integration services is a large library of data adapters to connect to a variety of different data environments. Optionally, you have the opportunity to make changes to the data. That's what we call transform. Often when you're connecting to a data source, the data that's in the data source is not in the format that you want it to be when you move it to your destination. We might have to change data types. We might have to split data. For example, first name and last name might have to be split apart. We might have to create data that doesn't exist. Maybe take unit price and quantity, use them in an expression to create a calculated column called total. We also might have to deal with nulls and replace nulls with an actual value. We also might have to perform lookups. You might have lookup tables that require that you actually look up a matching value and then replace it with some other value. You'll see an example of a lookup operation later in the course when we take a look at the one-day presentation of integration services. Once integration services packages are created and deployed, they can be executed manually. They can also be automated to run by themselves by using a SQL Server agent job that is scheduled. So you might have a need to periodically import or export some data. So the SQL Server agent can help you automate that process. Page 7, analysis services. In my experience, this is probably one of the least known about and least used services that comes with Microsoft SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server is not a single product. It's actually a suite or a collection of applications and services. The services will be things like the relational database engine, reporting services, integration services, analysis services. Services merely extend what the operating system can do. They run in the background, and we connect to these services through client applications. Analysis services is designed to host a unique type of database. Analysis services databases host data models. Relational databases have tables. Analysis services databases have data models. An example of where a data model would be used is if you wanted to analyze data using Microsoft Excel. I could connect to a data model hosted on an analysis services environment and use the pivot table feature inside Excel to analyze the data. Some of you might be using Tableau or Microsoft Power BI. We could connect to the data models hosted on analysis services and create our reports and visualizations based on this data. The cool thing about analysis services is it's a unique environment for hosting data, and it's designed for one thing and one thing only: very fast, high-speed response to a user's request for data. Relational databases, they're limited by their structure. Relational databases always store the data in two dimensions, rows and columns. The data inside a relational database are involved in relationships, and those relationships can actually slow down queries that retrieve data. Analysis services is designed from the ground up to respond to a request for data and satisfy that request extremely fast. Analysis services databases can also host a unique type of data model called a tabular data model. The cool thing about tabular data models is they reside entirely in memory. And because they reside entirely in memory, they can respond much quicker than data models where the data is hosted on the hard drive. Well, there's a variety of different things we can do inside these type of data models. We can implement data mining. We can also go ahead and pre-calculate and store our aggregations. We can also create navigational hierarchies. If you're with me for the one-day presentation, you'll see analysis services later in this course. And finally, reporting services, where we're going to focus our initial attention on. Reporting services is a tool that allows us to go ahead and connect to data sources, take that data, and present it in such a way the users can easily look at it and understand what they're looking at. Users often need to make decisions, and the best way to make decisions is to have data that makes sense and have data that's laid out in an easy to interpret fashion. Reporting services gives us the opportunity to create reports based on the data from our various data sources that users can easily interpret, understand, and make decisions. Integration services, analysis services, and reporting services fall under the realm of business intelligence tools. Business intelligence is often labeled as decision support systems because these systems support the decision-making processing. These reports are initially hosted online, and users use a browser such as Chrome or Edge to actually look at the report. The reports can be exported to different formats such as Excel workbooks, Word documents, PDF documents. We can create a variety of different types of reports. We can create tabular reports. We can also create reports that accept parameters. We can also link one report to another report, and we can make various items on the report clickable. So you might have a hyperlink. Click on the hyperlink and it passes a piece of information from one report to another. You'll see how to do that in Module 5. If you don't want to see the data laid out in 2 dimensions, rows and columns, and you'd rather see the data laid out in charts and gauges and graphs, we can do that. There's a nice collection of charts and gauges and graphs that we can use. We can also automate functionality inside reporting services. We can have reporting services automatically create snapshots. Maybe at the end of every business day, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m., we have the system automatically create a snapshot. We can also automate delivery. We can go ahead and create what are called subscriptions. So a user can subscribe to a report and receive it maybe as a Word document or an Excel document, or simply get a link in an email they can click on and view the report inside a browser. Users consume the report through a web portal, just a browser page. And then if they want to do something differently, they can export it like I mentioned earlier, but it's fully interactive inside the browser. The administrators have the ability to completely secure the environment, control what users can see and what users cannot see. We'll be talking about security in Module 9, the very last module of this course. Let's move on to page 9. When it comes to installing business intelligence services, you can install everything on a single machine. So if you wanted to set up a test machine or a study machine, you can install everything on a single machine. You would start with the Windows operating system. Then you would install Microsoft SQL Server. Then you would install the services, reporting services. Then you would install Visual Studio. So everything would be installed on the single machine. The benefit of having everything installed on the single machine is that you minimize the licenses that you need. But the drawback with everything installed on the single machine is a single point of failure. And you also might have resource contention. In a production environment, it's quite common for companies to have dedicated servers just for relational database engines, and dedicated servers just for reporting services, and dedicated servers just for analysis services. So they use what's called a distributed environment. The benefit is no resource contention or minimized resource contention and no single point of failure. All of these services require the .NET framework. In my experience, the installation utility for SQL Server will run a variety of checks on your machine. And if the .NET framework that is needed to install SQL Server is not present on your machine, the installation utility should install it. Worst case, you might get an error message telling you the .NET framework has not been satisfied. So you might have to go to your browser, Chrome or Edge, and simply do a search on the .NET framework, download and install the latest .NET framework, and then do the SQL Server installation again. An easy way to keep a Windows machine up to date with all the features and components that it needs is to simply use the Windows Update utility. And the Windows Update utility can download service packs and hotfixes, and also the most recent .NET framework. Let's move on to page 10. What's new in SQL Server 2016 and 2017? Every release of SQL Server introduces new functionality. So we can see here on page 10, the primary thing that's new with SQL Server starting with 2016 was they moved away from the Report Manager web interface to a more robust web interface called the Reporting Services Web Portal. So they gave us a new interface, and they also changed the name. So it's called the Reporting Services Web Portal. It used to be called Report Manager. The Reporting Services Web Portal looks very similar to a SharePoint portal site. So if you've used SharePoint, you might recognize some of the icons and functionality. We also have the ability to create key performance indicators directly within the portal, as well as interact with all the other features inside the Reporting Services portal to set security and other configuration properties. The Reporting Services web portal does support page-native reports. A page-native report is a type of report that displays the data on multiple pages. It's what we're going to be creating in this course. I'm also going to show you the Microsoft SQL Server Report Builder utility you could download for free if you would like to go ahead and be able to build reports using a free utility. The Report Builder tool that I'll show you later is a Windows-like utility that anybody can download, install locally on their machine, and start building reports. It's very similar to what you do inside Visual Studio. We also have the mobile report creation via the Mobile Report Builder. The mobile reports are designed to be consumed on tablets and smartphones. Since the interface is much smaller, we have a tool specifically designed to allow us to create reports that are consumed on these small interfaces. And I will show you where you can get the Mobile Report Builder, and I'll show you the interface a little bit later. 2016 introduced support for Power BI and Excel integration, and some improvements under the covers when it comes to subscriptions. Report improvements, page-native reports, additional styles, gauges, and maps to choose from. We added a tree map as well as the sunburst report object, ability to pin reports to the Power BI dashboard. In order to pin the reports we create with reporting services to the Power BI dashboard, with Power BI you have to have a premium account, or you have to have your Power BI tenant based on premium capacity. Addition of PowerPoint rendering, so we can actually take a report we create for SQL Server reporting services and export it to a PowerPoint presentation. We can also customize the parameter locations. Before, when we created parameters, they were on the top of the screen, but we didn't have any control of their placement. You're going to see that we now have a parameter grid at the top of the screen, and we can control the placement of our parameters. We have some improvements in subscriptions as well. There's also enhanced SharePoint support. 2019 can now host reports based on a catalog that's hosted in the Azure SQL Managed instance. So we can integrate SQL Server Reporting Services 2019 with the Azure cloud. This is useful if you have an on-premise data center and you want to go ahead and run your reports on-premise, but you want to go ahead and use data that's in the cloud. Reporting Services 2019 can now work with Power BI datasets. So these Power BI datasets would be published to powerbi.com, and we can connect to them and use them as a reporting services data source. We can now use tooltips to specify the text for each report element. You've probably used tooltips before in other applications. A tooltip is nothing more than wording that shows up on the tip of the mouse. It also supports Azure Active Directory application proxy, which gives us the opportunity to simplify report access via a web application or a mobile application. So users can authenticate through the Azure Active Directory database. It can also support custom headers via extensible markup language, and the Enterprise and Standard Edition now support transparent database encryption for reporting services databases. So the reporting services databases can now be protected with TDE. So if our reporting services server is ever compromised and somebody manages to steal the hard drives that have the reporting services databases, the transparent database encryption would make those databases useless. Transparent database encryption has existed in SQL Server for a long time. If you're familiar with Windows, it's very similar to BitLocker encryption. It provides encryption on the volume. Let's move on to page 12. There are some changes to reporting services, and one of the things that you want to be aware of is that starting with SQL Server 2017, SQL Server reporting services is no longer included with the installation media. So let me go ahead and show you what we're talking about here. I'm going to go to my file system, and I'm going to go look for the SQL Server 2019 installation software. And so this is the directory that I have for my SQL Server 2019 installation software. I'm going to double click on setup.exe, and after a few seconds we're going to see the SQL Server installation center pop up. And you can see that when we go to installation, you can see it says install SQL Server reporting services. Starting with SQL Server 2017, reporting services is a separate download and install. They provide you with a hyperlink here on the installation center. You can see it takes you to a Microsoft.com website. Before 2017, it was actually available by making the choice on the feature installation page, but now it's a separate download and install. You can also see that we have the link here for downloading and install the Management Studio. The Management Studio is also a separate download and install. We can also see right here the SQL Server data tools. This is what I was talking about earlier. These are the templates that make reporting services, integration services, and analysis services available inside Visual Studio. I'm going to close the installation center. So we now know that reporting services is a separate download and install. It doesn't take much to actually install it. Another thing you want to be aware of is that we no longer can support multiple instances of reporting services running on a single machine. It used to be that we could actually install multiple instances of reporting services on a single machine. So maybe you had a single server and you wanted a separate installation of reporting services for your sales department and another separate installation for your marketing department. But instead of having to do this on two separate machines, we could do it on a single machine through instances. Well, 2019 no longer supports that. So if I have a need to have a separate integration services installation for sales and a separate installation for reporting services for, let's say, my marketing department, you'll have to install reporting services twice on two different machines or on two different VMs. So reporting services no longer supports multiple instances. It's not new. It was actually introduced back with 2017. In my experience, some people don't like that. Let's move forward to the information in Section 2. In Section 2, we're going to talk about the reporting services architecture. I'll see you in the next video.